From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here. A veritable federation of composers has taken helm of the scoring Starfleet as its ships warp back and forth from the small to the big screen and then back again. But rarely have two newcomers to Star Trek made such an explosive musical decompression at bringing the band back together like Stephen Barton and FREDERIK Wiedmann with the third season of Picard. But though it's evidently the last time around for this retired captain who keeps getting pulled back in, this run of Picard arguably stands as the best single streaming season of Star Trek on Paramount Plus, and one of the entire franchise's finest hours at that. In no small thanks to Barton and Wiedmann's soaring, robustly symphonic collaboration that brings back all the feels of such Trek composers as Jerry Goldsmith, James Horner, and Ron Jones, for this salute to all things Next Generation. With Barton hailing from a galaxy of Star Wars Jedi games, and Wiedmann suiting up with such cosmos-saving DC animated heroes like the Green Lantern and Superman, these are two composers who certainly know their way around a space opera, at once delivering glorious Trek music fan service, while at the same time creating freshly suspenseful and heroic action for a familiar crew facing their own mortality and their own next generation, all while, of course, Kobayashi Maruing the odds against a seemingly unstoppable changeling conspiracy. Barton and Wiedmann show Trek's senior officer is more vital than ever, all while more than earning their place in the musical captain's chair. And now here are two composers who definitely are not wearing red shirts, Stephen Barton and Freddie Wiedmann. Welcome to Film Music Live.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's great having you here. Well, I guess before we even board the Enterprise, Stephen, Freddie, tell us about your journey through film composing and what brought you together in the first place.
Well, it's a kind of an interesting one because I started out originally with Harry Grayson Williams, who was very much my mentor and who I learned really everything from. And so I kind of came to this project by way of video games, because Terry Matalas is someone who had, who's our showrunner for season 3 and who was very much given the keys to the car on this one, was a very, very big gamer and had played a lot of Titanfall 2, which I scored. And he literally, I think Twitter actually, if I remember correctly, just literally messaged me one day and said, "Hey, by the way, would you be interested in scoring the show 12 Monkeys?" That it was just about entering its third season, and so I started working with Terry on that, and he's an incredibly musical director, a very, very musical director, and so many people often say that about, like, but he genuinely is. I mean, he genuinely will sort of, has the knowledge and the vocabulary to be able to really discuss it in the best possible way. So yeah, that was how I came to Star Trek, and it was something we chatted about a number of times over the whilst we were working on the last season of 12 Monkeys, and then as it became closer to reality, we started to sort of, kind of really chart out what we wanted to do with it. So it was really fun.
And Freddie, how about you?
Who I think Daniel you know as well. That was back in 2004, so I was his assistant for many years. And yeah, once I went on my own, with, quite frankly, a lot of help from John, to get my first movie going, it just kind of became, I've been busy ever since, it seems. So, whether it was me finding work online or my first job snowballing into other things, it's kind of that's kind of the natural organic course on how things go, I guess. So, and then, fast forward almost 20 years, Terry Matalas, our showrunner, also found me through a fairly unorthodox way by having used my score from another sci-fi film as temp for the season finale for Picard. And when they were starting to consider bringing in another person to score this, they basically listened to the temp and realized, well, why don't we ask him first, because this stuff seems to work pretty well. And then they reached out. Ironically, through my website first, which I didn't notice for over a week, which I'm still completely mortified by. But they ended up, making another attempt, thankfully, through my agency, and that ended up, getting to me in time, thankfully, to get this started.
We literally we had this hilarious thing where we got to about episode 6, and one of the things we said at the outset we were going to do was not track, which obviously for most TV shows is insane. But you looked at this kind of massive gargantuan thing that that Terry had made and realized, I mean, there was very little tracking that worked, to be honest. And Matt Friedman, our music editor, found as much as he could, but the simple fact was, it was like we were going to need about 7 hours of music, and we had about 3 months to do it in, and so about 3.5 months total. So it was one of those things where it was just, I think I was about in episode 6, and I was literally just dead, and and so at some point we were all sitting in a room going like, well, either we sacrifice this thing of like maybe we would just throw that idea out of like not tracking and not treating this like a movie, or and I think Drew Nichols at that point said, well, hey, the next episode's wall to wall this guy Freddie Wiedmann's music, can we find out? And so literally Terry is at the back of the room on a sofa going, I'm emailing him right now. I'm going to email him right now. So he sends him an email, and then mercifully we did eventually manage to get in touch. So because that saved the day. I mean, we would have been screwed otherwise. So yeah, it was incredible.
I think, one thing that really stands out about the season, not only are you bringing the band back together, but it's just all the wonderful ways that you segue between your really pretty great original scoring and, Goldsmith and Horner. And how was that decision made as to when to go to, okay, your score, classic themes, your score? How did that checkerboarding go down?
That was Terry, 1000%. Oh. You muted, Freddie. Here we go.
I'm just trying to mute myself so we don't have that feedback issue.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, Terry's he has had this whole thing, it seems, mapped out in his head, start to finish, down to the music. I mean, he knew exactly where he wanted to use which theme, in what way. He even had instrumentation ideas very specifically, because he's extremely knowledgeable with music, to a level where it's really just pure joy to be collaborating with him, because he's so specific and knows it so well and loves music on top of everything. So appreciates it very much for what it does. And yeah, it was basically Terry's roadmap, realized by Drew Nichols, our fantastic editor, who mocked it up with his temp score so extremely well that Stephen and I basically had it all mapped out from the get-go and could really focus on just how to translate that into the best possible version of it without having to search for a lot of things structurally.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, one of the biggest thing with Terry is his knowledge of music, of his shows is like encyclopedic. So if you could play him any cue in the show, any cue, and no matter how small, and he'll tell you immediately what cue it is. He'll probably tell us what cue number it is, and literally remember it down to that level of detail is like just almost a sort of savant level kind of knowledge of the music. But then very much said at the outset that one of the big things we wanted to do was really bring back some of the Horner ideas, and that nauticality that I think has, maybe that's one of the things that I think that wasn't sort of widely prevalent in a lot of Trek after Horner stopped scoring Star Trek shows, and so in terms of when he finished on his movies, so that's something that, there were echoes of it in Next Gen and echoes of it in Deep Space Nine in a couple of spots, but it was very much Terry had this idea of like what we're doing right now is a step back from the whole franchise. It isn't just looking at Next Gen, it isn't just looking at DS9, it isn't just looking at Picard. It's the whole thing, and that's, I think, one of the things that was very sort of typical of what actually Jerry Goldsmith does is that he, for example, where he is in Star Trek V, he has the busy man motif, which is a very major thing that then becomes attached to Data later on in Next Gen, and so there wasn't this sort of sense of that's this movie's theme and it will only be in the walls of this movie. It was much bigger picture, where you're sort of dipping into the story here and there, but it's part of a larger whole. So I think that was Terry's idea at the beginning, was like, what we should look at the whole board here, and nothing's off the table. So
now we've got a question from Louis Versinelli. Now, can you talk about the score track Leaving Space Dock? I believe it to be the perfect combination of old and new. The Titan theme is amazing as well in the whole score.
So yeah, that one, that's literally the first thing that I think Terry showed me and was sort of like, good luck, here you go. It's one of the, sort of scene mirroring, probably one of the best love scenes in all of the films, and saying like, oh, well, look, here you go. This is very much an homage to that. But then I think actually where the thematic idea from that cue comes out from is actually First Contact. So we chatted to Frakes a lot about this, and as we were starting to put stuff together, and sort of, I was on set a few times, and that was the one thing I wanted to talk with him about, was like, what was it like working with Jerry on First Contact? And so the idea there was like, we needed, like Jerry did in that movie, whereas we needed a movie theme. We needed the theme that's the sort of the whole series and gives you that picture, and something that sort of expresses this. And if you look at First Contact, it's very interesting. It's actually like, some people would think that the First Contact theme is very much a sort of meant to be around the end of that movie, where Zephyr Cochrane and the Vulcan, he has his first flight, and the Vulcan comes down, and it's a wonderful scene. But actually, if you look at the nicest use of that cue for me, is actually in a very early scene where Picard, Lily's pointing a phaser at Picard and says, and he opens the ship's doors, so you see Earth from space, and that's one of the sweetest, quietest, but most gorgeous versions of that theme comes in there. So I think at that point we were like, okay, well, what we need is a theme that really expresses that. It expresses this movie, this wide angle lens kind of idea, but also functions a little bit like the Enterprise theme came to function, which is like representing the Enterprise and her crew, as well as being, sort of the main theme. So that's kind of how that came about. It was both of those two ideas. It was the idea of like this sequence where we knew we wanted to weave in some sections and pieces from before, but we also knew we needed to debut, as the Titan comes out, this new theme. So that was kind of the genesis of that.
How was that sequence for you, Freddie, to score?
Well, this was before I was involved in this. So this is all Stephen, that theme in particular, and that particular scene too. So I can talk about things episode 7 and onwards.
We're definitely going to get there. Now, here's a question from Ivan Sorokin. Which track theme from TV episode or movie is your favorite one? And was it hard to work with existing and so well-known themes?
I probably have a quicker answer than Stephen, because he was using a lot more than me. But my favorite one of all times is First Contact. And I think it has a sentimental memory combined with it when I went to Ubeda, that film music festival, many, many years ago, with where they did a big 1-hour tribute to Jerry Goldsmith, and they performed that particular piece. And it was this beautiful night. It was warm. We were drinking wine, and this orchestra is playing First Contact. I think that I have this memory associated with it, other than just a track memory. So to me, that's one of the most beautiful Goldsmith themes he had ever written. And there was one cue where I was asked to try it, and we ended up going a different route, and it was still a little bump that it didn't end up in. But yeah, I think it's that one.
I mean, just on melodic things, yeah, I would actually probably have to agree. I mean, I think that's one of, and it's funny because when we used it in the end credits, I think the first few episodes, people saw it, and they were like, well, why are you using that? And there was the justification for it for us was, when you're watching the LCARS credit sequence, it's very much like Picard showing the Earth from space to Lily, who's just a civilian who's 10 minutes before didn't even know there was such a thing as a starship. There's this idea of this is what the legacy has given, and that was a really nice, I think, a nice idea of like, we were like this, we view what his way of seeing the Earth and what sort of Starfleet has given to the universe in the same sort of way as we view LCARS. I mean, particularly whenever I went to set, the thing that everyone does when you go on these sets on the starships is like is you want to press the buttons, and they do things, and it's great. And it's like they boot it up, and it literally it comes up on the screen, and obviously the only thing it doesn't do is make sound. You press the sounds are added later, but it is this fantastic feeling of like, wow, I'm touching something. And especially on the Enterprise D set, that was that was just like going back into your childhood. So it was a bit of that, and then this idea of I think the other one for me was that well, the other thing with that theme, of course, is then it was a massive clue as well, because like to the very end where we obviously bring up the Borg, it's like one of these things where it was also a massive clue and no one really knew that. So it was funny and interesting to see people's reactions. But my other little favorite motif is the very, very first thing you hear in the show is that busy man motif, because that was just one of the things that was it has an interesting, it's it's just 5 or 6 notes, but it's so evocative and just kind of has this feeling. So when we had the shot of in the 20th century, and that was the first thing we wanted to hear was just Dylan playing that on the French horn and just nailed it. Really high, really quiet, but sort of just has this feeling of like puts you right there into track. I mean, it's one of the most sort of evocative motifs I think he ever came up with. So those two probably.
Now, I'm a huge fan of Amanda Plummer, and she is just great as Vadic in Picard. Could you talk about the music for her insane spaceship, as well as, again, she's a very musical character. She's literally conducting in one of the episodes, Three Blind Mice. I mean, was there ever the idea we're going to do a symphonic version of Three Blind Mice?
Pretty much. I mean, actually, well, funny enough, I mean, one of the things that, I mean, Freddie, you should talk about the episode 7, because I mean, this was one of those things where with the Changelings, we didn't want to tell you too much. About the only thing we wanted to tell you musically was a sort of feeling of ancientness. So there's this and this feeling of a sort of almost like kind of the idea of that their history goes back a lot further than humanity's does, and there's the one thing we used in the early episodes was the Egyptian neigh kind of sound, which is like a very sort of but it's very processed and heavily, we didn't want something that felt very earthbound, so we wanted something that sort of had a sort of distantness to it and just feels like an echo on the wind. But the culmination of the Changeling idea really is in episode 7 with Dominion and with the epic cue at the back end, which is crazy that it's a TV cue. There's like 7-minute cues for television.
Yeah. So speaking about that cue in particular in episode 7, up to this point, Vadic has been set up to be a villain straight up. If the music was scary on the reveal of the Shrike, and herself was very ominous and very dark and scary, and clearly she's a big threat. But then when it comes to the invasion of when she invades their spaceship with her whole crew at the end of episode 7, that whole sequence was designed a little differently and unusual than you would normally do it when a bad guy comes to your house. So the idea was to kind of give this whole thing a 7-minute one musical idea that builds and builds and becomes this emotional roller coaster all the way to the end, to the final takeover. And there were several discussions to potentially use something from the classical literature and modify it and make that the theme, or even including the mice song.
Yep, it was discussed.
Yeah, it was discussed, but then we ended up doing something completely original, which currently it opens with piano and then solo cello, and it feels very classical. Like you almost wonder for a second, is this source music? Because we've had source music already several times. Like, is somebody listening to that, or is the score? Because it really falls outside the norm of what the score has been doing so far. And then it just kind of builds throughout this whole thing where they're trapping them, and then she eventually takes over. And I think what it does, interestingly, to the audience, because up until this point, Vadic has been such a threatening villain. Now suddenly it tilts your perception of who she is, because now you know more about the backstory and her own motivations of why she's doing all this. And it almost makes you second guess your initial thought of, yeah, she's the bad guy and these are the good guys. And now you're kind of like, well, I understand why she's doing it. So this was a pretty dark thing that they did back then. Maybe we should be rooting for her just a little bit. And I like that it makes you question a lot. And it keeps villains a lot more interesting, I think, if you give them that kind of perspective at a certain time. I always say villains they're always the hero in their own story, and I think that kind of amplifies that aspect of her, which makes it so much more intriguing and I think fun to watch and see it all fall apart at the end.
Now we've got a question from Esteban Cortez. The Titan theme is awesome. At the end of the show, the Titan becomes the Enterprise and she's its own theme. So if Star Trek Legacy becomes real, which theme will be used? Something hybrid. maybe?
It's a very good question. I think that, well, the honest and true answer is we just don't know at the moment. And it's something we'd love to make it. I know the cast are incredibly up for it. I had the pleasure of doing one of the Blu-ray commentaries with them the other night, and there's no shortage of appetite to make it, but it's one of those ones where the streaming is a nebulous and difficult thing to pin down sometimes. So whether the business side of that all comes together and works out is very much about how it's done and with the numbers, and we know it's done well, but it's just a question of lots of internal things about what the future of the franchise holds, really. But I think definitely we did very much write the Titan theme, and I say we there because very much Terry sort of helped it's something he sat at the back of the room for literally probably about 2 hours whilst I literally went round and round it, trying to find the back half, because I had the front half, and like as so many of us so often do, you're writing half a tune's really often easier than writing a whole tune, and so I was just absolutely trying to find the most sort of satisfying payoff, and he sat at the back of the room and kind of literally wrote it with me. So we very much wrote it in with longevity in mind, and and obviously one of the things now is it's really technically the Enterprise G theme, and I think that would be the way we would potentially take it, but yeah, nothing's set in stone yet. But it'll become very, very quickly widely known, I think if it does get greenlit. So yeah.
So we got from Dennis Christos. He loved the score and the way you interlaced pieces from track composers. But what a wonderful tapestry it is! And what was the inspiration for including these motifs in the fabric of the score? So I guess even beyond temp tracking it, what was like, okay, this is our theme, this is, because it just seemed to be so right in terms of going in and out of these, classic themes. I mean, this is such a great deep dive. You even had the music for the first time you see the space station in Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Yes.
So like, it's a total geek like me, I'm like, wow, I mean, they're really digging into this.
Yeah, and if you really know, there's the USS Grissom arriving music, and there's very deep dives into generations from both of us. There's it was and it's interesting when we say temp track, actually, kind of, because I mean there were some bits of track in the temp track actually, but what was really interesting was like Drew our editor had cut in a lot of other stuff. There wasn't wasn't wall to wall with one of these things. So and often what we had was this sort of the idea of like, here's one of the tracks, but what we want to do is find a new way of playing the melodic material, and so I think a lot of that was about sort of saying this is a point to really step back and like look at the whole legacy, and that we aren't just trying to stick the landing of 30 of 2 seasons of TV. We're trying to stick the landing of 36 years at least of television, and say and talk about the whole thing. And very much, I mean, at the end that that's at the end of when the Next Generation came out, it was very much about sort of, oh, here's where we're headed next, and we're very much trying to pass the next generation kind of musically. So it just seemed the right thing to do in terms of kind of really looking back to all the deep cuts, and kind of like was particularly, I mean, as guys, but people are spotting Ron Jones. Actually, that was I think someone who was a very big part of the track and then wasn't for a long time. And so his music, I mean, Best of Both Worlds is just a seminal piece of television scoring. I mean, it's a phenomenal score. And that one, I think for me, was one where I wanted to look at the way it was often less harmonically or melodically. It was just the way he scored things. So there's a lot of episode 3 is a very big Ron Jones homage, and particularly the way how he often goes for the jugular. And one of Terry's favorites note is his favorite music note is he says, commit. Just make sure if you're doing something, do it. Don't quarter do it. Like, just do it. It's like, go there. And if we've earned it by that point, and that's obviously a big question sometimes, like, have we earned something, this big or this emotional or this moment? But once you sort of understood that you have, don't go in half measures. And so that's very much a Ron Jones homage there. So I think with all of them, it just felt like the right thing to do. So
what about you, Freddie? Was there like a favorite time when the older theme came in?
Yeah, well, I think my favorite scene where I was able to use it was the end of episode 9 when they're going back on the Enterprise. which was a very intimidating task because I knew this was very important for not only Terry, but also the people watching it and all the fans that are finally getting the trip back to that ship from all these years ago. So I don't think I've ever physically sweated over composing a piece like this one, because it just felt like so much pressure and to do it justice, because it was beautifully shot, incredibly well acted, and the set that they had rebuilt, it was impeccable. It was amazing. I mean, so I really could not screw that up from my perspective. And we went through several versions of that too, because I knew it was an important piece. So we tried a couple of different things, especially theme placements for Alexander Courage and Jerry Goldsmith in that particular scene. It was very crucial that it landed on the right moments, on the right close-ups of the detail of the bridge and everything, that it just kind of emphasized everything in the right way. So I think that was the scene that I enjoyed the most using it, because it had so much more meaning. It had a lot of meaning and importance for what was going on screen. And those themes, they're so timeless in a way. I mean, I found it surprising as I was writing with them how well and how easy it was to use them, because they fit right within what else we were doing. It didn't feel dated or old or anything like that. It just worked perfectly. And I think, Stephen, in one of yours, you are even using the courage thing as a counterline inside the title.
Yeah,
theme, right?
yeah.
I mean,
there's a lot of weaving.
And it just fits like this amazing glove on everything.
Weaving together. And I think the other big thing, what we were doing, we were really asking at the very outset. I mean, we kind of had a sort of jokingly, like, we should have T-shirts made of what would Jerry do or what would James do. But I mean, kind of literally. And one of the things that's actually interesting when you look at the Goldsmith scores is, I mean, he always reinvents. He always brings new material to the table. But one of the things he's really good at is bringing new versions of the old material and sort of particularly actually Dennis McCarthy's a really interesting case in point. There is someone else who does the same. And when we turn off the lights of the Enterprise D for the last time, or maybe it's the last time, I don't know, maybe they'll pull it out for some other reason, but we wanted to there very much to go back to when we use verbatim, I think about 20 seconds of we re-recorded it, but the final cue as they're standing looking out in Generations at the sort of the wrecked hull, and it was just one of those moments where we're just like, this never fully got to be the swan song of the Enterprise in the way that it so beautifully is musically. So bringing a lot of that back it was almost a thing of saying, well, if they'd been around, they'd have probably done the same thing, and or found new ways, as we definitely have tried to, of like playing the themes. So yeah.
Now, Robert Townsend says, bravo, guys. Amazing work on this whole season. And I love the Goldsmith references. Were you at the sessions, and did you get to hear those themes live?
Very much so.
Oh, yes. Hi, Bob. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I was only at 3, but it was just incredible. I mean, just the LA's finest musicians and at Eastwood Stage and at Warner Brothers. It was just incredible.
Yeah. We definitely try. I mean, one of the things we tried to do was at the very outset was we deliberately pushed for a larger orchestra, and it was one of those things where actually, bless them, CBS and Paramount Plus were incredibly supportive, because I think once they sort of figured out what we were trying to do, it's one of those ones where you can't take the very end where we have the original Goldsmith main titles, but we knew we wanted to do a new recording of it. You just can't really get away with that with 30 players, 35 players. It's got to be a full you need the orchestration, because there's nothing in there that you would add or take away, really. It's such tremendous writing. So yeah, I mean, conducting that stands one of the great honors of my lifetime. It's like, because I don't think we'll probably see that one again. Well, maybe we'll. I don't know. This is the thing. It's a really interesting question, but in case it is the last time, it was great.
Yeah. Now we've got a question from Dale. Frederick, and one of your PR photos shows you holding a guitar viol. It's also mentioned in your Sound Iron interview. Can you talk about this instrument and the manner you use it in your scoring?
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, I love that thing. Do you have one too, Stephen?
I don't know. I was like, that's great. That's a deep cut.
Yeah. Do you know? Have you seen one of those? They're amazing. Yeah, I'll show you guys. So
we'll give it a moment. We do use it. I know you were using it a bunch.
Yeah, it's it's basically a bowed guitar, and it's fretted, and it has 6 strings, and it's tuned just like a guitar. So if you know how to play guitar chords, you can basically play anything you want on there, except you bow it. And that's why the fretboard is slightly shaped half round, just like a cello. But yeah, it's a very cool, like, metallic sound. You know, and you can play melodies, you can play chords. Has a kind of a metallic cello type quality, but it's strange enough that most people don't know what it is when you play it. And the most beautiful thing about this is it has a pickup, and so you can amplify it with anything you want to make it even stranger. You know, guitar amps and delays and any effect you desire. Really, it's a lot of fun. So I use it a lot for textures and sometimes melodies. It's a great tool for, you know, when I do like some war movie that takes place in the Middle East. It's a good alternative to those other instruments we hear a lot, duduk and, you know, ouds and bouzouki and things like that. It's just kind of gives it a nice unique color that most people don't even know what it is, but it sounds very organic and melodic still. So that's why
sort of leans a little to that ancientness as well, because I mean that was definitely something where, you know, particularly with the changelings, we wanted it to have that feeling of like something close to familiar. You sort of know what it is, but you're sort of like, I'm not sure that it is. And yeah, Terry really responded to that one.
Yeah, and actually, just circling back to Star Trek, I'm using this one quite a bit during Vadic's backstory of what happened to her. I think what's the Q name on the album?
Dominion, I think, on the soundtrack.
Dominion that's the one afterwards. It's the one.
Oh no, you're right.
Proteus. Proteus, yeah, that one. So that you can hear it on there. It's this like weird couple of like notes that kind of, I guess, the ancientness is encompassed in that too, which we talked about earlier. So yeah, it's getting used in pretty much everything I write in some shape or form.
Well, send in your questions, everyone who's watching. We've got a bunch to give out. Picard soundtracks, thanks to Lakeshore Records. You know, I mean, there's so many wonderful musical moments in this, and one I found immensely moving was what you could call like the whole switcheroo between Data and Lore, where you think he's really going to die, but you know, there's somehow a feeling there's something up his sleeve. Tell me about scoring that sequence.
Oh, that one was fascinating because it was one of that was about the point where I stopped reading the script, because there was these the script distributions were going around, and I was working on probably I think episode 1 and 2 whilst they were still shooting that, and so I actually had a studio at Santa Clarita Studios where we filmed everything, and so the sound stages with particularly the Enterprise D set and the Titan sets were just literally 50 yards over a parking lot. But that was the point at which I sort of stopped because I didn't want to actually read the end. I wanted to watch it and watch the cut. So and that sequence was, I mean, I think one of the things was that you know, we weave in some source music that references back to some early, you know, there's some music. A lot of the source music has been used before in Next Generation specifically, usually, and there's a couple of pieces there that it weaves in and out of. But I mean, it's just this great moment of catharsis. That was really the sort of you really think it's the turning point of everything sort of turning right, and then obviously, you know, sort of quite swiftly, you know, end of episode 8, beginning of episode 9, things do not go well. But it's just this great moment, and this ability to bring Data back, and you know, that was probably the hardest. One of the 2 hardest secrets to sit on for 6 months after we finished this, because it was just such a neat moment, and it's also just particularly getting to meet Brent Spiner and watch Brent Spiner. I mean, I got to see Brent do the one sequence where he's talking about you know, where he's flipping between the characters, and it's just gobsmacking to see him do it, because it's like he's got it down to such a fine art. It's just like flipping a switch, and it's amazing. Yeah.
In another sequence I absolutely loved was the build where the essentially the get off my plane sequence where you know, where suddenly the Raptor and she's got the effing solids line. Tell me about that whole build up to another kind of turnaround from Utter Doom.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, there's a couple of nice sequences there. There's Raffi's sort of big payoff moment where we get to really give her a sort of punchy, a really kind of culmination of everything her character has been sort of working through, and she's very much the one who sort of kind of starts to really first figure out the conspiracy, and then you realize how it connects with Rolar and through that. But to be able to take there's a conspiracy ostinato that is woven through a lot of the show, and that's sort of the culmination of that. And obviously by the time we get to the end, you don't really hear the conspiracy thing from there on out as sort of its culmination. So that theme sort of kind of checks out there, and that was, I mean, that was a lot of fun. And and Amanda Plummer, she's just incredible. I mean, also in terms of actors, just watching them hone their craft and watching them work, she's something else, because she's the sweetest person in real life. She's like the loveliest, kindest, nicest person, and then she just turns it on, and you're just like, everyone's just like terrified on set, and then she comes off and she's like, how is that? How's it really nice? It's very, very, very funny. I mean, but also where you really see that how the greats of that craft are just there's something else that they're, and that the experience and the ability to do that it's definitely not so. I mean, I think we all like sometimes look at things on TV and be like, how hard can it be? And it's like, oh, really, really hard, really hard. So yeah, that was really fun. I mean, just a privilege.
Now, I think you mentioned a couple, but Yavar Maradi would love to know what is each of your favorite Trek themes by Jerry Goldsmith? And if you've named one, name another you dig.
I would have, I mean, the Next Generation main title probably comes right after the First Contact theme for me. It's so good. So good. On its own, in the score, it's an incredible tune. I think it's memorable, it's heroic, it can be used in all sorts of different incarnations, and it always works.
And he came up with it in a weekend, which is, after getting a note that there wasn't a theme and they needed a theme, he went away and on a Friday, got a note saying that, and then on Monday came back with that.
Unbelievable.
Which is pretty crazy. I mean, I think I'm very, very closely torn between Voyager and DS9. Voyager, particularly, I think Voyager was the first one that was sort of like, I mean, I grew up with Next Gen, but then Voyager kind of had a special place, I think, partly also because of the because of the amazing recording of that theme, where there's the trumpet playing on that recording is just absurd. And so actually when we came to use it in this one, and obviously with 7 of 9, that was something that we wanted to bring back. We also really wanted to look at how it's scored, and the really interesting thing about Voyager, which is I think is particularly the episodic scoring, is that quite often they go big by going small. So when we use it in the Fleet Museum sequence, we've been quite big on it's quite big and noble on the DS9 theme, and then we use a bit of the snippet of the original Alexander Courage tune. But then we come to Voyager, and one of the things we wanted to do was not go big with it when we see it, not make it a big moment. It actually strips down to just horn and a counter line and nothing else. And that very sort of spare kind of approach, I think, was one of the things that I always remember, particularly from the final season of Voyager in the last episode. There's a lot of times where they didn't, as what Jeffrey Katzenberg always used to call dancing in the end zone with the music. They didn't dance in the end zone ever with the music. It's actually very restrained. But because of that, just feels very human, and I think that's the one that probably sticks for me.
Now, I did not see the Borg coming. I got to be honest. What was it like jumping into that big reveal, and how much of the Borg music did you want to call back? How did you create your own Borg music?
Well, I'm going to start on that one. I think the Borg is revealed in episode 9 for the first time. Is that right? Yeah. So I think it was one of my cues. So this is what we said earlier when Terry said, like, go big or go home, like commit to the moment. And I think when we first see the Borg cube, I wrote this massive brass theme, just heavy, big, threatening, as big as can be. I was not holding back at all. And I think, that's repeated multiple times on mostly the big epic shots of the cube in the nebula. And then, the size comparison between the Enterprise and the cube to see how massive that is in scale. I think it was all about that, like how enormous this threat is should be equally reflected in the music. So it's a very big arrangement of that Borg theme that we're using in episode 9 and onward.
Yeah, I mean this is the one where it's really funny because we spent a lot of time, certainly in the early episodes, being like, what's going to give it away? Like, what's too much of a clue? And so obviously the Goldsmith synth theme was out. We couldn't use that because that's just too obvious. And so there's little snippets of it. I mean, even the sort of choral kind of Borg idea. There's a very sort of synthy, very sort of stylized choir thing that's often used in the Borg, and particularly used in around things like Battle of Wolf 359 in the original version. So that's again, you can't play it because it's just too much. But then we sat and debated First Contact in the main titles, the end credits or the main on end, being like, is this too much? Are we giving this away? And I think it was just a matter of gradation and, kind of finding ways to sort of hint at it with some of the red door. I mean, because you have the red door and you have the first time that the changeling, attacks Jack when but when he's finding the saboteur in I think it's in 3 or in 4, 3 off the top of my head, I think. And that was very much when we were like, okay, well, hang on, we need something. So there's just hints of it. There's little hints of aspects of it, but just the tiniest little snippets. And then obviously once you get into episode 10, then we go full Borg.
We go full Borg. Daniel, question for you. Yes. When you were watching episode 9 and you heard that Goldsmith synth Borg theme in the very opening, before we revealed them, did you know? Did you recognize that?
Well, here's the funny thing. I worked on the temp track with Andrew Silver, another great music editor, for both Star Trek First Contact and Star Trek Insurrection.
Wow. Amazing.
And I'll tell you, dude, it still will never be better than helping to temp those 2 movies. Yeah, oh my God. I mean, just again, just seeing, just how well you guys just captured that. I was lucky enough to go to some of the sessions for, both of those scores.
Oh my God.
And again, the whole process of even temping, though, it was very different, because they had one approach for television and one approach, for how we're going to have music in the actual theatrical films. But no, I mean, I didn't get it. I was totally like, what? I thought we're over here. Why are there 2 more episodes?
Well, then all the people that sort of got to the end of episode 9 and said they're never going to finish this in time. Yeah. Sort of like, I was like, okay, well, firstly, the last episode's nearly 70 minutes long, 64 minutes long, and then just being like, okay, well, it's like how late should we leave this? But it was fun actually, and then actually fun seeing the sort of with the sound design. I think a lot of that sort of, because when you get onto the cube for the first time, this is a cube that's being sort of eaten by she's just feeding on it and the last dregs of it, and the sort of it's kind of it's particularly sort of back to that really horrific first. I know I got the first sort of feelings of, like, I remember seeing the first episode with the Borg in season 2 of Next Gen, and being like, this is genuinely scary and genuinely great. And then it was one of those things that I think the Borg became such a feature. It wasn't they became diminished, maybe some people might think they were or whatever, but to bring back that sort of initial Borg, like, oh, this is really not nice, I think was definitely something that was on Terry's mind, and sort of making it as horrific as possible.
Yeah, no, I got to ask about the Borg Queen. I'm like, oh, is that Alice Krieger's voice? And it was. I honestly don't know who actually played the character on screen, but what was it like playing the Borg Queen? What was it like the Borg Queen and the Do
you want to say that one first?
Oh, you mean how to treat her musically, yes. The Borg Queen? Yeah, I think there's this amazing reveal of her. You hear her voice, and you've heard her voice already many episodes ago, not knowing what it was. But when Jack is in the cube facing her, and then there's this amazing camera push going up, and you first see her from behind and just kind of the silhouette. And I made this very big, dark moment because it's the first time we see her. So yeah, it was crazy. It was a beautiful shot through all the cables and the wires and the stuff in this this green environment to the back where we see like the shape of her body.
There's a really interesting thing, the set design there as well, where you know, I mean, Dave Blass and everyone who did, you know, worked on the sets of these things, have just nailed it. And the thing that was really great is that you know, there's a kind of in the design, all the cables that are underneath her, it's almost meant to look kind of like a skirt or kind of like a sort of a dress or sort of a ball gown, kind of something. And there's this incredibly sort of you know, kind of Shakespearean sort of, you know, something about that that's very interesting. There's almost like an elegance despite the incredible creepiness and incredible sort of like, oh, you know, she's basically feeding off the drones that are left, and you're like, wow, that's pretty nasty. And it's a really interesting idea. I think it's like one of those ones where, you know, even then her voice is still, you know, Alice's Crease voice is so great and so evocative and sort of almost has that sort of seductive quality to it, and you want a bit of that. It definitely is like sort of, you know, where you get to this point where Jack gets on board, and even though we, you know, and we know that he's got Borg, you know, essentially Borg DNA in him, and he's unable to kill her. But there's, you want to almost sort of set musically this idea that it's not just because he can't, it's because he, like, there's an element of him that doesn't want to, because of the sort of seductiveness and you know, there's that I think that was a very interesting sort of juxtaposition, and how they set that up in the story, but we were able to play with musically.
Yeah. Now, you know, there's so many moments of I'm not crying, you're crying in this, and I gotta admit, I got choked up. A lot of people got choked up, and we see them all on the bridge. I started sobbing, and I stopped myself on my exercise bicycle.
Good.
Like, I can't. What were there any moments where you guys just like lost it emotionally working on this?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think going on I mean, for me, it was like the set of the D was just like, I mean, I saw it a couple of stages, because I saw it sort of in construction, and there was one point where they were filming on episode 7, I think, and the set wasn't quite finished, but all the arch was in, and a lot of the paneling was in, but it was sort of like a bare bones version. None of the screens were in, and the carpet had just gone in, literally. The carpet was that day, I think, in, and there were big signs on it saying, please don't, we only have one of these carpets, please be very careful with it. You know, so it was a very interesting day to go to that, and we walked over to the set with Frakes, and you know, and he was just pointing out, he was like, well, that's Brent's chair, and that's you know, that's Gates stands there, and you know, LeVar stands there. Just sort of sitting there going like, holy shit, I'm standing in a piece of my childhood here. This is amazing. So that, I think, for me was probably one of the most moving things. And then I think also then when I went back for one day where they were shooting, you know, with the final scene where on, not the final scene where they turned it off, but the final scene of 9, where they before they leave for the cube, and Patrick turns around and says, well, it's been an honor serving with you all. And the funniest thing is, on most sets is, you know, between takes, it's like a flurry of activity and noise, and this set was completely different, because literally everyone was just on a pin drop, you know, everyone just standing by the side, just like catching every word, and you know, they almost didn't have to ring the bell to sort of shut everyone up for a take, because everyone was gathered round to watch. I mean, there was no doubt that there was a bit of history being made, and you know, like, this is, you know, we're never going to get to see this again. I mean, this is amazing. So yeah, that for me was probably the most sort of a moving moment, I think. And you know, some of the early sessions as well, I think, also then you know, particularly with the Titan theme, sort of, you know, kind of, because the Titan theme was one of the sort of, as we started to use it, and you never quite know when you write a theme, you never quite know whether it's going to go the distance, and whether you're going to get everything you need out of it. And so that was, I think, once we got to about episode 3 or 4 and started to realize, I think this is going to work, that was sort of a kind of, it was a big relief, mostly, actually, and then you know, just a sort of privilege to be able to sort of say, oh, this is a Star Trek theme. That was kind of wild. So yeah.
Well, I keep humming it like almost daily, so thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, you know, for me in particular, I think the schedule was so crazy, because when I got called in to start scoring this too, it was like, here's the first episode and go. And it was kind of this race to the end with our fairly ambitious TV schedule that we had. So I really didn't have a whole lot of time to sit there and, get too involved emotionally in anything. I just kind of wanted to get the job done as best as possible. But there were certainly moments, especially the end of episode 9, when I heard that piece for the first time live with an orchestra, definitely did a number on me emotionally, lots of goosebumps. And I probably got choked up a little bit too, because it was such a, when that came to fulfillment, this piece I'd been working on for so long, and that I had felt such immense pressure on writing, that just seeing it come together and hearing it again for the first time, it's a pretty amazing moment.
So here's my question. If they do another series, if you had to imagine it, how do we bring back the wonderful, obsessive, compulsive captain who is dead seemingly? How do you magically make this happen?
I will say Terry knows exactly how they're going to do it. Exactly how is not widely divulged, and I don't know the full equation there, but they have a very clear and a very cool idea, to the point that both Todd and Terry are sort of extremely excited by it, I think. So if it happens, that they have a way. But yeah, I mean, he by far was it was really funny with watching the early episodes and seeing people people not being sure about him, be like, oh, he's dead naming 7, and we don't like this guy, and then now by episode 8, they're like, we'll riot if you kill him. I'm sort of sitting there going, actually they're not going to be very happy because he's dead in the next episode. But yeah, he's Todd is just amazing, and that's the funniest thing is that's so much of his personality as well. When we did the one of the commentaries recently, and it was he's one of the most spontaneously funny people. And just and able to just be so deadpan to a degree that pleases me, but being British, I like deadpan humor is very much my thing. And so he's my favorite line of his is I'll bring them all aboard, it's basically a hotel now, and sort of there's just this real sense of he's just nails those deliveries in a way that it just doesn't, it feels so naturally him. But I mean that's Todd. I mean that's 1,000% Todd. He's not an asshole, but he's just able to just punch out those one-liners like that. It's a gift.
And I think deservedly so. He holds the award for most memed up character from the season on Twitter. I mean, it's been just joyous to watch people and whatever else it is from his character, it's just all over. It's fantastic. I love what they've done with it. So I mean, definitely a fan favorite.
This is such an amazing level up for both of you. I mean, really, this takes you from one place and it puts you on a whole other place. And the way the show ends, it's not an end, it's a whole new beginning. If you had to pick your spin-off to hopefully work together again, which will it be?
It's a good question.
Oh, I would take any of any versions or ideas that, I mean, there's obviously many places to go, but
I think the big one for both of us, I mean, it's Terry is a big part of that, because it's one of those ones where, there's no other showrunner who could have made this show. There just simply isn't anybody else. And it was his absolute love for the franchise. I mean, absolute dedication to making something good, and willingness to go a bat for it as well. Because definitely times where TV schedules are TV schedules, and it's, you try and make basically three or four feature films in that space of time, and there's just as very well, equally well. I mean, it's that's the equation there doesn't necessarily work, and you often with the with a post-production schedule, you're just looking at rolling one mix into the next, rolling one dub finishes, and they start dubbing the next episode the following day. And it's there's the other problem we ran into is it's often so hard to record now, where it's the stages. There's times where we call to try and get onto Sony or Warner Brothers, and we did almost all of it at Warner Brothers, but where we would be the 6th or 7th hold, because there's just so much being made. And we had our fight finale session, which actually we were very honored to have really the sort of a list of the A-list of the A-list, where they'd all come off Indy 5 that morning. They did a 10-1 on Indy 5 and came to work for us in the evening. So I mean, there was no doubting that it was just sort of a jam-packed kind of thing. So I think just if whatever Terry wants to do is one of those ones where I think we both know it's like he just has this ability to find a great story, write a great story, put it together, and then fight like tooth and nail for what he believes that it should be. So that, you know, that's, but I think the 25th century and 25th century. So that I think that story is, there's a lot to tell there still, and we'd both love to tell it, and I know the cast absolutely want to tell it. So yeah.
Now, Stephen, you're going to be entering a galaxy far, far away on a PS5 console for me with the release of the new Jedi game on Friday. Give us a peek.
Yeah, I mean, that thing's amazing. It's you know, it was a very funny year doing both projects sort of side by side. You know, mostly they didn't quite overlap too much. We had a bit of a respite from Jedi Survivor, but that it's such an amazing game. It's, you know, great to reunite with Gordy Harp, because he and I have had, you know, we've done this as our third project together, and we it's so much music. I mean, we did 29 days of scoring at Abbey Road, recorded probably just over 8 hours of music for it. And you know, it's and Alan Myson has done, you know, absolutely, I think, done one of the greatest orchestral recordings I think I've ever heard from even him, which is like, you know, saying something. And it's just it's a terrific thing. It's a really big, deep story. It's very much our Empire Strikes Back. So the first game is, you know, I think has the optimism potentially of like paralleling New Hope. This one really goes there. It's darker, it's bigger, better in every way. And there's one sequence in the last, you know, 2 hours of the game. I mean, the last 2 hours of the game blew me away. I mean, playing it when finished form, but there's one sequence in particular that's, you know, about 10 minutes long. That is the greatest thing I've played in any Star Wars game, and probably pretty much any game I've played. It's just it's you deep dig into Cal Kestis' soul, and it's pretty incredible. So yeah, I'm excited for that one. I think people will enjoy it.
Is the score coming out Friday too?
Yes, we're out Friday.
Oh, good. I can't wait to hear that one that you mentioned the other day.
Yeah, there's about 4 hours of music on the actual soundtrack, and we have also an incredible second album that's coming out, where we've sort of reinvented the idea of the cantina, and you know, a lot of credit there really has to go to Steve Schnur, who's spearheaded it's just the coolest thing. You know, it's in-world music for Star Wars, but taken through a very, very different lens. And it's not by Gordy and I. We didn't write it. We helped curate it, but we're very much not the composers of that. And it's not composers. It's bands, and like there's some really cool bands. I think people are going to be blown away by that.
Can't wait.
Wow. So, Freddie, what is ahead for you?
I'm currently doing the next seasons, plural, of The Dragon Prince for Netflix. And what else is going on? Oh yeah, I did a film for Rennie Harlin, of all directors. It was kind of interesting.
Oh my God, what was the Rennie Harlin experience like?
It was great. He's a super sweet guy, wonderful to work with, very great musical ideas and sensibilities. So it was a fantastic experience. And the movie's called The Refuge, and it's probably going to come out sometime this year. I haven't heard much about the release date yet, but it's a cool little exorcism movie. So different.
Exorcism is in.
Yeah. Apparently, right? Evil Dead Rise.
Is exorcism ever really out? It's
never.
Like it just goes away and it comes back, and it's
yeah.
Well, I think I figured out how to resurrect Vadic, so I want her back.
Exorcism in Star Trek. That's not a bad idea.
Let's do it. Stephen, Frederick, I just want to thank you so much for joining us at Film Music Live. Absolutely amazing work. I can't tell you how much I loved this season of Picard, how I think it really is one of the finest Star Trek hours, scoring, show, everything, just a knockout. I want you all to watch season 3 of Picard on Paramount Plus, with Stephen and Freddie's score available on digital and vinyl from Lakeshore Music. And a big thanks to Whitebear publicist Christian Gabriel and DeCinio, and to our show producer Dale Turner, Mark Northam, and Mark Banning, and our friends at Lakeshore Records. We'll see you on the next Film Music Live.